Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. You've probably heard the famous quote, attributed to Oscar Wilde, about people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. It's a quote that suggests that understanding price is relatively easy, whereas understanding value is significantly harder. Yet we've all been in situations where we've bought or sold something and then felt ripped off, or that we got an amazing deal. And of course, how we feel about the price we've paid or sold something for isn't just a function of how we feel in the moment the sale is agreed. Our perception of what a good or bad price for something is can change over time, which makes it the perfect subject for an episode of the show. Because much as we might like to think we're good at pricing things, the truth is most of us don't know that much about it. If we're taught about it, it tends to be in economics or accounting, which might not be that helpful when it comes to agreeing a price in the real world. It's a dynamic with plenty of opportunity for human risk to manifest itself. Pricing is something we all have to deal with, both as consumers, but also when we're selling our products and services to others. Even if you don't run your own company, and if you do, you'll know all about those challenges. You're going to have to put a price on your labour when thinking about who you want to work for. Not to mention the joys of buying and selling things like cars and properties. Understanding what goes into pricing is therefore a useful skill for all of us. And my guest, Melina Palmer, has just written a book about pricing called The Truth About Pricing: How to Apply Behavioural Economics So Customers Buy. Melina has been on the show before. There's a link to that in the show notes. She's a behavioural science practitioner and author, and the host of the Brainy Business podcast, where she specialises in making behavioural science principles easy to understand and practical to implement to solve business problems. As you'll hear, I had the pleasure of meeting Melina last year when she was in London putting the finishing touches to her book, and I can tell you that she's a lot of fun. I think you're going to enjoy this. It's my discussion with Melina Palmer on the truth about pricing. Melina, welcome back to the Human Risk podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm so excited to have you back because you were one of my very first guests on the show. And amazingly, in podcasting land, you often don't get to meet people, but we've met face to face since then. And so I'm really excited what we're going to talk about. But for my listeners that haven't caught up with you since the first episode, what have you been up to?
Well, yeah, thanks. Other than, hopping across the pond and reaching out to people that I could tell were super awesome and saying, hey, you want to meet up in person when I happened to be in London? And, that worked out. So, yeah, I have. So we spoke when my first book came out, which is What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. Since then, I have had a baby, and then had another book baby, which was What Your Employees Need and Can't Tell You. And I've got the third book, The Truth About Pricing, which is coming out. I'm not sure exactly when the episode comes out, from proximity to when this comes out, but the book is coming out in January of 2024, January 9th, at least here in the States. So really excited to be able to talk about pricing and all of that. And other than that, been doing speaking and consulting, and the Brainy Business podcast has over 350 episodes now. So just keep on keeping on.
Amazing. I love it. And as listeners will detect, right, we met offline. And I just loved it because you're one of these people that's just full of energy. You are exactly what you get when you listen to your show, but also people are hearing now. But let's talk about pricing, because that's the subject of the book, and we'll time this so that it is available and easily accessible to people when they listen to it. What's the interest in pricing?
I have always, well, that's not quite right. But like from the beginning of the podcast, so The Truth About Pricing, which is the name of the new book, is also the name of episode 5 of the Brainy Business podcast. It's called The Truth About Pricing. And that became kind of a, if it ain't broke moment when we were finalizing book titles, that I had said to, the publisher, like, hey, if we're not going to keep the same naming convention, can we go with the talk I've been doing for over 5 years and how we've already been talking about this thing. So back then, I decided to do an episode about pricing and kind of thought it was going to be this one-off thing. I wasn't really thinking about how massive this was going to be for people. And it became, really something I was known for. That was when I first introduced my It's Not About the Cookie framework. I did a 4-part series. So, talking about pricing, talked about change, talked about how you use this when selling from the stage. And then I also talked about the difference between value and cost and price and these different aspects in these 4 episodes. And again, that was, episodes 5 through 8 of the Brainy Business. And that has now become so what your employees need and can't tell you is based on the change management book. The truth about pricing is, of course, based on the truth about pricing. And it was something that has just really, really resonated with people and become so much the core of what I do with clients and talks that I give and things like that. And have just come to find that people really hate pricing. It's like this necessary evil of business. And it doesn't have to be that way, but it's so stressful for people. I've found over the years that people focus on the wrong stuff. You get really hung up on things that feel very important. This becomes a bike shedding problem, but they're really not the most important thing. And so, as far as then also when you look at where there's the most opportunity to help people in business to be able to sell more, to feel confident, to have happier customers or clients or members, whatever you have, to be able to have happier teams and salespeople, like all this stuff and be more profitable, like having really great pricing that you're confident in, that just holds true to what your brand is about, is so central to that. And it's something that really no one else talks about. So that's, I guess, why it became a book.
I love all of this because as someone that runs their own business, I encounter this the whole time, right? It's like you have this dilemma of I don't wanna and approach it completely ethically, right? This isn't about how do I make the maximum amount of money, but I don't wanna rip myself off. I don't wanna feel like I'm
Right.
spending a lot of time doing something that's not being valued. Equally, I don't wanna embarrass my clients. I don't wanna turn them off. But and sometimes you need to be expensive to be in the right room because otherwise your product isn't valued. And the thing I find fascinating about it is this isn't just a business problem. This is something that affects all of us all of the time. So as we go out and we buy things, we will have a view on some subliminal level as to whether the price that we're being asked to pay or always being offered to us if there's a negotiation type situation is reasonable. And so what I love about it is this is a brilliant example of where business and I was going to say business and pleasure, but business and personal life meet where we're all being asked to value things. We're being asked to value ourselves. We think about if you're employed, there's a salary. If you're selling your services, there's a rate you get. Or if you're buying a product or service, then you have to assess this. So even if we thought, well, pricing is a grubby discussion, it's not something we want to do, it's work. It's not. It relates to all of us. And so I love the fact that you're tackling something that, on the face of it, it feels like this is a commercial book and a commercial. It's not at all. It's everywhere, all around us, all of the time. Pricing is a thing, and we often try and shy away from it.
Yeah. And I think with that, being able to even understand why something that you bought, like, so we all have those things that we have bought in the past, and like you couldn't help yourself, right? Where you said, oh, it's such a I don't normally do this, but right. And then you
Yeah.
jump in on whatever the thing is. And the thing is, like, have you ever wondered why? Like, why that thing? And you may think that it was because it was the best product for you, or it was something, inherently about why you needed it. We could logic around it all the time. But really, there's a lot of the psychology of why that thing was the most appealing and how it became to where it wasn't even about the price. You knew that it just like became part of who you are almost, right? Where those best brands become a part of our identities, and the products and the services are things that sometimes we're excited about paying more. And there's tons of research throughout behavioral science showing, when we pay more for things, we often value them more. We think they work better. And it's not only about raising prices, like we've talked about. I have examples like of Costco and the value that they provide by having very discounted prices and what that says about their brand. But understanding why you buy things and how we behave in that way and something that brought you in, it's really funny when we go to price our own stuff, we just forget how we like to buy things and, what humans really care about in a way that's just super awkward and weird, right? The things that you think will work when you're sitting down and you put on your pricing hat are so far from the way you buy. And so being able to demystify that a bit so that you can remember what it's like to be a human when you're setting your prices and thinking about how you're going to write the script or how you're going to present it in a chart and why this matters and how to share that information is just really valuable. And it's nothing against, of course, like the actual person. I'm not talking about you specifically, that you do this, the person listening, as only you, right? This is how we're wired as humans, that we just kind of forget about, and we're not fully connected to the way that we're making decisions in, system 1, system 2, which I'm sure you've talked about many a time on the show before, so I won't dig in.
I love the way you used to approach this, because one of the things that's joyous about reading your stuff and listening to your show is that what you're doing is in some cases, taking complex scientific theory and making it simple. But equally, what you're doing is taking things that we all intuitively understand that are simple in of themselves and sort of going, well, let's just stop and let's think about what's going on here so we can understand it. And so I thought about it. I thought, well, it's quite scary, right? Because you start the pricing thing, it's really simple, right? It's sort of like it's basic economics will tell you it's a simple thing. And yeah, it's quite complex. So how did you even start to tackle this subject?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. And I know when I came over to London, it was where I was finishing the book and I was there for 2 weeks. And we had a lovely chat that I think we scheduled for a 30-minute coffee that quickly became 3 hours.
That's my point,
And
right?
so,
Okay, so one, we can talk, but two, there's a big subject up.
yeah. And with that, what I found, just so from years of working with people on pricing stuff and digging in, reading about it, talking about it, I just kind of inherently have a lot of the aspects of and seeing where people get stuck, what other people aren't talking about. But what was really interesting as I was doing a lot of research for the book is just how little people even talk about psychology when it comes to pricing. And if you go and do Google searches, like many people have, I'm sure that are listening to this, if you're interested in pricing at all, if you set prices in your company or you're looking at selling, you've probably Googled something like how to set my prices or best way to price my service, my business, whatever, right? Like you've looked for that and you probably found articles that left you feeling more confused and overwhelmed than when you started,
Yeah.
right? And they give you, some have 4 models to choose from, some have 7, some had 14 different models to look at. And most of them don't mention psychology at all. The ones that did had it as an option in like, once or twice. And it was for something as simple as like that's boiling it down to say psychology was just whether you round your prices down to like a 9 or a 7 or you end them in a 0,
Right.
which is, some of what we can look at from a psychology of price, but really it's this tiniest sliver. And it's not something that every business should do. It's a really bad strategy for an entire segment of companies, which I talk about in the book. So, like when you just willy-nilly throw out advice like that and say, "Oh yeah, that's how you do psychological pricing." Ta-da, right? I mean, you've missed so much
Right.
of what's important on this. So, yeah, I think just what I've found too over the years is the simplest little reframe, a tiny shift in the way someone's talking about something, the way they're thinking about how to structure their prices, the way they talk about it and they think about it, can have this massive, profound, huge impact on whether someone chooses to buy or not. And the amazing thing is, they often don't change their prices at all. They don't change the product at all. It's like just how they talk about it and how they present it that makes all the difference. And knowing that and wanting to help people to sell more of the right stuff, was the place to start bringing it all together. And as far as, picking what goes in the book, as with, I'll just say all my books. I guess I can say that now that there are 3. As with all of my books, there's always way more that I wanted to say than what made it into the book.
Right. It's like the musicians, right? With the tracks that will one day be released, but they don't belong in this space. There was one bit that I really loved, which is you've got a table's not the right word, but you've just got a list of words. And what you're
Mm.
basically encouraging people to do is look and think about which ones resonate. And it's literally a page full of words that range from accurate, adventure, enrich, leadership. So it's random sort of things. And what you're basically encouraging people to do there is to think about the underlying dynamics. So how would we describe things and how do we think about things? And I thought that was super interesting. Talk us through that thinking because I think that's a really interesting way of approaching it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you for that. So, this is in part 3 of the book. The It's Not About the Cookie framework kicks off part 3. So, before we get to that, we go through part 1, which is some of what we've already really been talking about here, right? The problem with how other people talk about pricing, why psychology matters in pricing, and a little bit about how our brains really work is part 1. Part 2 is this foundation, this set of areas that you need to be thinking about and being able to answer specific questions and to be thinking about building this foundation around to get to then setting the price. So, one important note too, I've said it a couple of times here, but I tell you, the truth about pricing, which I say explicitly on page 3 of the book. So it's not like I'm giving away a secret that came, late. Is that
You'll get
pricing's
this
not
if
a
you buy the if you download the
right.
Kindle preview, right? This is not the
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, is that pricing's not about the price. So all the things that happen before the price matter more than the price
right.
itself. And but it's something that people don't really talk about, or really give enough time and focus to. So that's where part 2, this building a foundation, is about. And it takes you through 6 chapters. So you work on you, because ultimately, you, the collective you're the biggest barrier to your pricing and selling. So you want to get on board with your own psychology, for one. Then you look at the customer and some decisions and thoughts to make there, the market, the company, the offer. And then we talk a little bit about the numbers, and giving some space to where you can start to be working on a final number, which you don't even get to until part 3 of the book. So then it kicks off with that. It's not about the cookie framework, which has 6, areas and concepts of behavioral economics that make it up. One of them is priming, which is the scent of the cookies, of it being not about the cookie. And this really is so much in the word choice, making it to where for you to really own an area and have it so that your customers, and again, clients, members, whatever you have, know that it all applies here. That when they see your logo, hear your name, think of you, if you want them to only remember, if they can only remember one thing, what's the most important one? And I talk a little bit about some research that was done where people were shown a flash of a logo while they were watching a different, video about something else. And those who were shown the Apple logo in a way that they couldn't consciously recognize it were more creative on a following project than those who were shown the IBM logo. Those who were shown the Disney logo were more truthful than those who were shown the entertainment, logo. And when you think about how amazing that is, of how much would have to go into being singularly about something in a way that everything lines up with it, right? For you to see the Apple logo and for it to actually make you think different
Right.
and be more creative and innovative is so amazing. And when we think about our own businesses, we get so muddled up with all of what we could be. And we think about all these different words that we like and images, and maybe they line up, but they probably don't. And because brands are memories, the way we interact with them, it's built on association. I talk about, an article where it talks about how, our memories are these pieces of Lego and building them together. And if you don't work on your brand properly to be about something, one thing really specific, you're kind of saying, like, here's this big mess of Lego all over the floor. There's, a bunch of pieces there. Trust me, it could be something beautiful. I can see it. Can't you see it? Like, no, it looks like a big heap of junk, right? It's nothing. Whereas if you have the constructed item, because every time people interact with you, it's rebuilding and reinforcing that, Lego castle or whatever it is that you have, you become about something. And so taking the time to choose your words very wisely, and I tell you, you can't have more than 3. And as we have steps throughout the book, you pick your word, you understand what images are tied in with it, because just because it's how you think you've interpreted that word doesn't mean that you're thinking about everything that anyone else could be thinking. I tell you to go search it, as images, make it a hashtag and see what sort of nightmare comes up that you weren't thinking about
Right, right, right.
before you align your brand with it. But then you can really be about whatever that is and have it be a touchstone that word and those images show up really in everything that you're doing consistently, so that you become known for that. And if it aligns with how you're pricing and what your company is about, it just makes things that much easier.
I mean, you make it sound really, really simple. Well, which is the
Oh,
beauty of
good.
which is the beauty of what you the right and the way you talk about it. Obviously, it's highly complicated. And the thing I find really fascinating is that you're using behavioral science to unpick, back to the point I made earlier, around intuitive things that we all understand, right? When we talk about the list of words, we talk about there's a sort of visceral reaction to stuff, right? We all know when something feels ridiculously cheap. We all know when something feels like a ripoff. And of course, sometimes that's based on things we can point to. Sometimes it's based on gut reaction. We don't quite know why, but it doesn't quite feel right. And so one of the things I always think is interesting is that you bring in a lot of behavioral science terminology into your show, but also into your writing. But you do it in such a user-friendly way. And I'm really struck that there are so many people out there that don't do that, right? That drop the names, that will talk about books that are famous or talk about biases or paradoxes or whatever without explaining it. And kind of like, oh, if I tell you it's this, then job done. And you go that little bit further and you're really unpicking it. And so for you, it seems to me the vocab is a gateway, right? The terms that's your entry point. Right? I'm going to give you the term so you've got it. But I'm going to give you, dear reader, just enough so you get this, and then let's talk about what it means.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And as far as the like highest compliment I think that I could get for when we align with the work that I do and what I'm trying to do and how I want to help the most people to understand what behavioral economics even is, why it matters to you, and feel compelled to go, like you can go do something with it. Like that really is the the core of what I and the Brainy business, is really about. So hearing that comes through is delightful, right? That really is the kind of that warming moment of what I intend with everything that I and we do here. So thank you for that. And I mean, to me, it's like when I do a presentation, I do a lot of speaking, whether it's corporate training or keynotes at a conference or anything else. And like, I really know that storytelling is so important in the way that we understand, interpret, remember all these different aspects. And so, yeah, I could just go drop a bunch of, words, but that's not the point, right? I want you to remember it and to experience it. And that's when we're talking about stuff in our brain, it's so easy to say, well, I don't do that. Like, no, that's not real, right? Because our brains are kind of set up to trick us into not thinking we do these things. But when I can have the entire room experience it at the same time and you were a part of it and like, so like I give examples of, I love anchoring as a concept. And so, one of the things I'll ask when
So
I'm doing a
just
talk.
talk people through what that is, just in case they're not
Oh,
familiar.
no, no, I got to tell the story
Okay, tell the
first.
story.
Come on,
Okay,
come on.
okay, cool. We'll get there. We'll get there.
So when I say it for this, I'll say, I'm going to ask you a question. You can't Google, right? The intent is that you probably don't know the answer. And so I'll say, do you think there are more or less than 100,000 penguins in Antarctica? At this point, I know that people just want to have an answer in their brain. and I make them actually shout it out, and I'll wait until
Okay,
we
well,
get,
so
and you get a mix.
replicate that, right? I'm going to go. Of course, there's more than that because
Okay.
that's all the people, all the creatures in that space, right? It's got to be more.
Well, yeah, but we get a lot of people that say less too. But okay, so we've got a more here. So now is time to name and claim. If it's not 100,000, how many penguins would you say there are in Antarctica?
Wow. So obviously, well, I've said more, right? So it'd be embarrassing if it was slightly more. So I'm gonna go for 500,000, Melina.
Okay, so we say 500,000. And we'll have people be shouting out their answers here. And so actually, there are about 12 million penguins in Antarctica.
So I was right, but with the first answer, wrong with the second, right?
Right. And so with this, we might go, whoa, how are we so far off? So the anchor, my intention here was for your answer to be incorrect, right? Which is one, I primed you by the way I set it up by asking, making you say a more or less first. And I gave you that 100,000 number before talking about it. If I wanted you to be close, if I had said, are there more or less than 10 million penguins,
Right.
you probably would have been closer to 12
Yeah.
million, right? And so that anchor, that number I gave you, because our brains are lazy in the way that they choose things, it locked onto that and says, hey, this person probably knows something about penguin populations. I asked you more or less. You're going to go off of that number because of how I set up the question. What's important to consider now is what if I had asked you if there were more or less than 1 billion penguins?
Right.
How different might your answer have been?
Yeah.
In that case,
Okay.
right? So those numbers make a really, really big difference. And, a good friend of mine, Brian Ahern, who I don't know if you've had him on the show, but he's awesome. He's
No,
written
but he
quite a
sounds
few.
great. Okay. So
Oh, he is.
set
Yeah,
that
because he's
one
my
up for
friend,
me.
and that's
Okay.
all we need,
Perfect.
right?
Perfect.
So he has an example in one of his books that's layering in this anchoring and relativity piece. And so when we go here and let's say you go in, you want to go buy a couch, right? So you go, you find the perfect couch, you think it looks great, and you say, hey, how much is this couch? And the sales associate says, oh, let me look. It's $900. They say, oh, I'm so sorry, $700. All right. So we have that moment in mind and how we feel about the couch. So let's step back. You're going in, same experience, same couch, same place. You go and you say, "Hey, sales associate, how much is this couch?" And they say, "Oh, let me look. It's $500." Oh no, I'm so sorry, $700.
Right.
We feel different about the couch. In one scenario, it feels like a great deal. In the other one, it feels kind of like, ugh, maybe I should keep looking. That's so expensive. The couch was never $900 or $500, but because of the anchor that came out before we got to the real price of the couch, it feels totally different, right? So when we're presenting a price for something, our brain will often tell us we have to start low and work our way up, right? We say this is the base, and then you could add in this, or you could do this. And if we layer on this, and some people might need that as we work up to the thing that we actually want them to buy. The problem is you anchored them on something way less than what you really want to sell to them. So, first, simple concrete tip I give to people is you should, one, always start high, work your way down. Two, is that you don't want the thing you really want people to buy should not be the most expensive thing that you offer. You need something beyond that that you can start from, that we work our way down, that helps it to feel like it's more reasonable, and that it's a good deal and value. And it's not to say that the top thing is something that you don't want, that you wouldn't want people to get, or that's a bad price. It can be something that you'd be delighted if people were to get it, but most people won't, right? Most people don't need whatever this extreme version is, but its job isn't to be sold. I talk about it as creating a wingman for your best offer in the book. So that wingman, could still be, delightful for someone, but its job isn't to be purchased. It's just trying to, get a date for the best offer.
So this might be the equivalent of the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu.
Yes.
Somebody might order it, and that's great.
Hmm.
But the purpose for it being on the menu is because it makes the next few bottles look more reasonable. So there's a great
Yes.
example of how restaurants might use that. we'd like to think it's about fundamental value, but actually when we look at it, as to your point, it becomes about relative value, becomes about perceived value. And
Mhm.
therefore, that's where behavioral science comes in, because actually this is what we might think of as a kind of a sort of quantifiable dynamic isn't really, because it's a matter of perception. And so all the things that
Yeah.
you talk about, that the example you've given being a really, really good one, is that it's how we perceive things. And so our satisfaction, our willingness to engage in a transaction on either side of it is driven not by what is this thing actually worth, but what do we both feel it is worth? And that's where all these other perceptive factors come in.
Yeah, and that's where it's finding that sweet spot. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, right? But it's the understanding what the person who's buying values, what matters to them, what problem are you solving for them, how's this going to fit into their needs in their life. And it can be about their identity and how they feel important and whatnot. There's value to that, quite a bit of it, right? But we underestimate it often, especially in, as a small business. It can be hard to, we don't think about those things sometimes and what you're giving to people in that way and the gift that that really is. And so if you just look at how much it costs you or what you would pay for whatever the thing is, you are almost never your best customer. And you
Right.
probably wouldn't need to buy the thing that you're selling, or else you wouldn't have been able to make it, or you wouldn't know enough about
Right.
how it works and things like that, right? And so coming from your perspective of how you like to buy things, how you like to engage with things, what you need and what you would pay for it is just so different often than what the customer is. So it's important to separate from those things. Another in the book Blind Sight by Matt Johnson and Prince Guman, there's this quote essentially in there that I really love too when it talks about I can't remember if it specifically calls out Nike by name, but or if it's just about a shoe, but to say, like, if I believe that my Nikes make me run faster and jump higher, who's to say that they don't?
Right.
And so knowing that the brand becomes a part of our identity when we allow it to do so, that value is so, so different. And while it doesn't have to be about increasing prices always, I talk about that more in the book because that tends to be where people get hung up. I do give examples like of Costco and how they have created their a prime example of what I talk about is choosing whether you're a value brand like Costco or a quality brand like, say, Louis Vuitton. And so lowering prices and holding firm to that and like really extreme member value is super, super important. It can be just as difficult for companies. But we tend to get in our own way a lot when it comes to the value and increasing prices. So I talk about that a little bit more in the book. And one of my favorite examples for this is I talk about grilled cheese sandwiches. So if you think about a grilled cheese, even if you don't know how to cook, I mean, could probably eke one of these out, right? You could figure out how to make a grilled cheese sandwich. And if we
And
think
if there's a
about
lot of people saying no, Melina, this is your next book, but let's go with the presumption that people do know.
we assume you could figure out how to put a piece of cheese between bread and
You
heat
hope
it
so,
up,
right?
right? So with that, and if we think about just how much it costs, right, to put together a grilled cheese, it's like $1 maybe, to buy the ingredients and to have them to make a single grilled cheese sandwich. And so, now the question being, let's imagine that you are like hankering, you really want a grilled cheese and you've been wanting one for, we'll say, like a week, and you're like salivating over the idea of this grilled cheese. How much, like, what's the max you would pay, you believe you would pay for a grilled cheese sandwich, or what you think anyone should pay for one?
Wow. Well, so I would go, depends where I am, but I don't know, let's say, I mean, $20 feels unreasonable. 10 bucks feels, ignoring the high end restaurant or whatever, but 10, oh yeah, 10, $12.
We don't, yeah, I mean, and we don't have to ignore a high end restaurant, but so if you weren't going to ignore them, what would you?
I could, well, like you pick an amazing one. I might go 20, 25, 30 if it was, I like, good, who knows what cheese you put in there and what quality of bread,
Right.
but yeah. So
Okay.
I could, like, yeah, a big range, right?
Yeah, yeah. But even there, right, you're like, I mean, 10, 12, 20, 25, right, as we're getting to the most extreme of what we think people would pay. So there's a restaurant in New York. It's called Serendipity 3, and they have a $214 grilled cheese sandwich on their menu that you can order.
What does it taste like, Melina? Because I'm sure you've tried it for research
Not
purposes.
yet, but I need to. Yeah, they also have $200 French fries. They have a $1,000 vanilla sundae. I mean, they have very extreme items. And you may be thinking that, that's a PR stunt.
Yep.
And sure, in some ways it is. It's a Guinness World Record holding item, one of several, like we said, they have on the menu there. And it's an amazing high anchor that has to do with a bunch of identity pieces and things like this, right? So now you know about Serendipity 3. Maybe you want to try the thing to show that you did. But if you don't, and you go eat there to show, like, I went to Serendipity 3, you want to be a part of that magic. You're probably going to post about it on social media. You're going to take your family. You want to talk about it. You have this expectation of how delightful and delicious and amazing this sandwich is going to be. And our expectations set our experience. And so you're more likely to love it in that way. And even if you don't buy the $214 sandwich, if they have like a $35 version,
Right.
you'll probably feel better about getting that, right? And this shows the anchoring we were just talking about. You've anchored now on 214 instead of, a dollar for the ingredients and making it yourself. And you would pay a lot more than you might have thought because of how this is all set up. And again, that $214 sandwich, that's a wingman, right? Its job is to make a lot of the other stuff look good. Some people will buy it, and that's great, but most people won't. And I always like to the reason I thought grilled cheese was this perfect example is because while they did get a world record for it, it's not actually the most anyone has ever paid for a grilled cheese. So some people listening, maybe you yourself, remember the Virgin Mary grilled cheese sandwich?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah? You're like the first person, as I've been doing interviews for this and talking about it, so many people don't remember this, which I think is fascinating in and of itself. But so many moons ago, there was a woman who made herself a grilled cheese at home, that dollar worth of ingredients, took a first bite, and then looked down and saw the face of the Virgin Mary in the sandwich. And so she stopped eating, put it in a clear container with cotton balls, and then says that, set it next to her bed for 10 years to where she said it never got a speck of mold because it's, this divine sandwich. And then after those 10 years, she decided to sell it on eBay, and after 38 bids, it was purchased for $28,000. So, most people would not pay $28,000 for a new sandwich, let alone one that's been sitting next to someone's bed for a decade. Gross. But you don't need everyone to buy.
Right.
You just needed, one person to buy at that level. And there was a market for it, right? 38 bids to get it to that point. And then if we look about, again, 214 is still more than what you'd pay. And, Five Guys has, I think theirs is, $4.38 for a grilled cheese sandwich, which is, more than what most would pay. But you need to know who you're selling to,
Right.
what the market is, how many people are going to buy,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
And I think that's a perfect example of, we might think this is a simple science, but there's an art to this whole thing. The one example that really resonated with me, of many in the book, but the one that I sort of kept coming back to was you tackled the question of whether we should put prices on things. And
Mhm.
so I think that's a really interesting illustration because logic would say put prices up there so people know what it costs. But you neatly distill why one should or shouldn't do. And there isn't a right answer here. And
Yeah.
so when we look at this whole thing, this isn't a book and this isn't a subject about which there isn't a right price, if you like. It is the set of circumstances that you refer to that did drive us to what the answer is.
Yeah, and definitely I know that my, clients, students, whatever, I always sort of joke I should have whether it's like a mug or a t-shirt that says it depends, is my go-to for a lot of things here. But, in the case of whether or not you should have the prices on your website or whether or not you should offer a discount, whether or not you should bundle things, whether or not you should have a loss leader, whether or not you should give away anything for free, whether or not you should offer a subscription or a membership or it's just on a, priced per item that you sell. across the board, you never have to do anything. And I say that very explicitly in the book. Just because everyone else in your industry is doing it that
Mhm.
way, just because you feel like you have to, just because people are saying, well, we can't possibly charge more than X for this thing. Any of those limits, whatever they are, don't really exist. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to do, and you can always push and try something new. And often, doing something that no one else in your industry or space or whatnot has done, or that no one else is doing, is a really great opportunity for there are people out there that are craving for the thing that you have, whether they realize it or not, right? That's where we can say with the Starbucks, there's always the Howard Schultz saying, if I asked people if they wanted to pay $5 for a coffee, they all would have said no,
Right.
right? But they did. A bunch of people, when they did surveys originally, said they would have no need for an iPod. Ha, right? Like, all these things, they may not know that they want or need it yet, but you don't have to do things ever. You can kind of choose how you want to approach it. And once you free yourself from that, and you can take one or two or 10 steps back and really look and see, like, what's missing here? How could this be amazing if we did this a little bit differently? What is it that people don't yet see? How could this be different? I talk about, looking at your problem or the product you're looking to sell, that best offer, or a moment where you're in the selling process, and thinking about, if you were to consider it and turn it in your brain into like a tangible thing, and you were to try to pick it up and look under it, look behind it, shine a light over here, look really close, step back and look at what's around it, things reveal themselves and can allow you to approach that experience or problem differently than anyone else has, which can be really, really compelling to the right people. And you don't need everyone to buy, you just need the right people to see it. And if you understand it at this depth, why you're making a decision, how it aligns with what your brand is about, what your customers want, and all of these aspects, and it's super clear, it makes it to where it's just easier to buy from you. And again,
Right.
coming to the root of all of it, it's just not about the price.
That's such a great conclusion, because I think the natural start point, the logical start point, the thing we're always taught is it is about that. We're focused on, but for reasons you've just outlined, that's not the case. I'm intrigued, Melina, how this impacts you both as a businesswoman and as a consumer. Like, how are you applying this? Has writing the book changed your perspective on it?
Hmm. Well, of course, with any of these things, as you dig in deeper and you learn more and you consider all the nuance of how to approach things, um, it impacts decisions you make. We will never get fully out of, even when we know some of the rules. And I know for you, having worked in the space of, the greater behavioral sciences for a long time, we can't change everything and how our brains are wired. And so it's more like we catch ourselves and say, oh, don't do that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not true. Right.
Usually when it's already happened, right? You know?
Yes. And so, but I like to introduce a lot of in what your employees need and can't tell you, I talk about it as introducing thoughtful sludge. So, thoughtful sludge being, if you can think about in advance and know where you're going to get hung up and where your own brain might defy you and set you astray, if you put little moments of pause that are pre-built into habits and routines and processes, to where, before you send the pitch email, you have someone else that has to review it, that is explicitly going to be looking for where you might not have framed it properly, or making sure that you're going to review and ensure that at least one of your priming words exists, and how does this line up with us being a quality brand versus a value brand, or whatever. You have these moments. So having done that for myself, that is, both having done it previously for myself and for clients, and then it becomes the book and it gets reinforced. And then there are, freebies that come along with the book to help people, do this kind of themselves. So you don't get hung up and stuck in some of the same ways where I and my clients have in the past. It's like learning from how our own brains will get in our way.
Love it. Because it struck me that when you, and one of the things I found and this is a compliment to you, when I was reading it, I suddenly, for a period of time, I was like, right, if a price is presented to me or I'm presenting one to someone else, I need to think. And of course, that's sensible, particularly if you're buying a high value item. But if you did that every single time, either selling or buying, it's the equivalent of kind of the cognitive blockage you've had if you were trying to cross the road, right, as a pedestrian, where I
Right.
must process all the information. So the heuristics that we use, the things you talk about, they serve a value, which is allows things to happen. Because if we stop to, I'm buying a coffee, let me just contemplate whether the price that I am being offered is reasonable, right? And overthought, or the person selling me the coffee had overthought the price. Well, we need to recalibrate the price of the beans. The price of beans have gone up today, and nothing would ever happen. And so there
Right.
is this need to respond to things, but equally, I think it's interesting to recognize the heuristics and the shortcuts that are on display here. And so I like this idea of it's highly complicated. There's a mass of factors there, but let's just tackle one or two of them. Let's just think about the basic things that might be at play here, either as a seller or a buyer. And then we can start addressing it and we can get better at this. And so for me, it always seems like it's a skill set that we develop. We can get better and better at this. We're not going to instantly be able to be pricing gurus because actually we need to unpick lots of habits that we've picked up over time, both as consumers and sellers.
Yeah. And, all my books are really set up to be ones that you can keep using again and again and again, and that it does get easier over time as you're setting up new habits and ways to be using this. And so um there's this balance of getting too bogged down, and this is part of why I talk about you in the book. And so you is the title of chapter 4, and then chapter 15, the last chapter, is called Back to You, because and I always kind of end with this, like, now you know everything matters, but I don't want you to get totally hung up on the idea that everything matters and create this
Right.
analysis paralysis where you don't do anything because it's easier to just kind of spin on all of what could be. And so, picking one thing, whether you look at the like 1% better than you were yesterday, focusing on something until it becomes a habit, and then the next thing, there are ways to prioritize and just do one little thing at a time and see the benefit and the value that can come there, and being able to then go back to the book again and again and again. And like you said, there's a lot in them.
Right.
And especially in this one, I tried to make it as close to the, like, just do it for me, just tell me what to do, where I know how people feel when they get to pricing, like, I just please tell me the answer. It's like as close to that as I can get in a book, and giving you real, set of steps to do here. And there's a chapter called If You're in a Rush, to make it
Right.
the even like more streamlined version. But when you can just be revisiting and tweaking and going again and again and getting a little bit of growth here, and then you may notice, oh, I didn't even realize how this could apply over here. It hits you differently each time, I hope, and that it can just be, a resource that gets used over and over again.
And was there anything when you looked at this subject that really surprised you? Was there anything there where your start point for writing the book was different, or I don't know, that just surprised you was more powerful than you might initially have thought?
I think it really just is the thing that has really stuck with me as the most surprising thing is how little anyone talks about the psychology and how it relates into pricing. It's just the plethora of advice and information out there that does exist just doesn't even touch on this. And if they do, it's at a different level. And so knowing how important that information is for people, I think is really helpful. One other piece that comes in, and understanding how I think choice architecture, especially in this book, is something that people don't think enough about, how they present the options and how you talk about the choice and how you structure and sort things and how that impacts buying experience. And so I think it really is like an unsung hero, and it comes in late in the book as we're going into applying, because I feel like you need to earn the right to think about it
Right.
and have this skill that can really be a superpower, because that the way you present the choice is so paramount to whether or not someone feels good about buying. So, yeah, and that's something that really is just you only really get from behavioral science.
And I love this idea of earning the right, because I think one of the things that often happens with behavioral science, and
And you might argue that simplifying it doesn't help, right? Because people go, oh, well, if
Mm.
I can distill it down, right, just get me to the answer. And I think the lovely thing about all the dynamics you talk about is that you sort of have to understand the universe because in a given situation, one thing might be more relevant or salient or important than another. It's not kind of like if you do this, X will happen. That's also, I think, why we don't talk about it because there's something grubby. People often say, we don't like to talk about salaries. We don't like to talk about money is a bit grubby and things. And so pricing, it seems to me, is in that zone of we kind of understand it. We recognize it's a particular challenge. We want quick solutions to it, but there's a lot of social hang up around it. And I think that, I don't know what you think, but I think that comes from the complexity. Like, economics summarizes this quite simply. If there's a willing seller and a willing buyer and they match, job done. That's the market price. But what you've pointed out is there's a load of things there, and we think we understand it, and we'd like to understand it, but we don't always until we step back and think.
Yeah, definitely. And it is, it's something that doesn't need to be this, sort of taboo subject. And on some level, people know and understand that people should be paid for the value that they create and items that they're selling. It's a weird world where we've gotten so used to free, you know, like I have, commercials, blah, and like I can't believe I have to pay to skip ads or whatever it
Right.
is, but it's like, that company spends a lot of money to create the thing for you that you don't want to pay for. But it's become just this interesting view on what we're kind of like entitled to and how this all comes about. But it's really interesting where in one domain, I might say, I would never pay for that. Like, that's ridiculous. I would never do that. And then you can go $1, like 99 cents. I can't believe they're asking me to pay 99 cents to not see ads. And then on the other side, you say, oh, that Xbox is on sale for $4.99. Woo, what a deal. Like, I can't wait to buy it, right? And so it's just a weird way that we move in and out of what we feel like is a value for us. And maybe the Xbox sits on a shelf, but it still felt like it was a good investment because you got it as a deal or this idea of who you were going to be. But and you continue to use that other app every day and gripe about how you hate watching the ads
Right.
instead of just paying the 99 cents. So,
I think what you're doing is unpicking the intuition that we're bringing to play because everybody understands the idea of what a price is and why you might need to set one. But what we're bringing to play is an analysis of the situation that is not as wholly formed as it could be. If you said to the average person, do you understand pricing? They would probably say, yeah, I get it, right? I have a rough feel for what it involves. And so you're breaking, almost shining a light on something that we all intuitively understand, but probably don't understand well enough.
yeah, that's, I think, a great summary of my life's mission.
As you've talked about the subject, is your sense that can we make this any easier? Because I think a lot of the problems with pricing is the nebulous nature of it. And whether that's, I'm not going to tell you what this costs. If you need to ask, you can't afford it type logic, or whether that's airlines, I quote you a very cheap price, but then I add a load of things on that actually you thought were included, be built on, or I set you a high price. I mean, it is the complexity that's there. Is that necessary? Is that part of the game that we like to play? Or is there a way that we can simplify this? Or is it just a case of the complexity is going to be there and we just have to navigate that?
You know, I I feel inclined to say it depends, and I'm going to step next to that here a little bit to say that yes, I think in general it can be simplified. It doesn't have to be as complex. And the demystification that I have attempted within the book, I think, is helpful to understand ourselves and our decisions and how to be presenting things in a way that we can be confident and, commit to a price. Because that's the thing, right? If there isn't a perfect price, and there never will be one, I hope that feels empowering to you to know that if you can pick something that you can stand behind and say, this is it and this is why. And for now, we are happy with it and we own that. And you can say it with confidence, it will go so much further than and do so much better than if you had a different price that was more perfect or more correct,
Right.
if that even existed, that you weren't all that sure about, and you're constantly debating and tweaking and things like that. And so owning something and feeling good about it and just going out there and saying this is it until we make another decision and at least we know why is a huge step in the right direction. And the hope is that the way that the book lays out, each chapter has prompts, tasks, questions to be answered, things I do with my clients when they work with me and the Brainy Business directly, that you can be going through and you answer, and that you're going through something other people have done before, and you can say, yes, this is why we do that. And then if someone down the line, we've all had the, idea that got killed by a committee somewhere, that,
Yeah.
they say, well, add this, and why don't we, and couldn't we just, like, everyone else is doing a sale, we should too, or whatever else, right? And where you can say, no, we don't do that because X. And when you have a reason behind it because you took in the time to be thoughtful about it in advance, it makes it that much easier to stick to it when it matters and hold to it. And again, have that confidence in yourself and everyone across that collective view of the team in a way that's going to increase sales. And so, really, again, I think that can demystify a lot of this. And, I give answers to a lot of those kind of one-off questions of, like we said, should I offer a discount or not? Do I need to have my prices on my website or not? Should I end in a 9 or a 0 or a 7? Should I do I have to offer something for free? Do I have to anything, right? I address those, some of them in like, no, do it and then leave it. But some with some more detail as to why. But again, I think that helps to make it easier for people. That's the hope.
Love it. Love it. Well, you certainly do. And look, Melina, as ever, I could keep talking to you forever, but time is against us. So before we close out, remind people, once, talk about your podcast, talk about your business, but above all, talk about the book. Tell people where they can find out more about these things.
Thank you very much. Well, all of my books, of course, you can find on Amazon and anywhere else that you like to go to find books. You can also find them and the podcast and look about, consulting or speaking, any of that at thebrainybusiness.com. And for anyone who is interested in, checking out, maybe reading a chapter, get a little sneak peek before you commit to buying, you can use the URL, go to thebrainybusiness.com/human risk, and you can get the chapter of any of my books for free there to check it out and see if it's a fit for you. And of course, if you prefer the socials, you can find me as the Brainy Biz pretty much everywhere, and as Melina Palmer on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Wow. Almost like you've done that before.
Yeah.
Fabulous stuff. Look, as ever, I love talking to you. I think you've got some amazing inspirationals. I love this book because I think this, probably of all the ones you've written, all the things you've covered, this is something that afflicts me as a business owner, but also as a consumer, right? We want to get this right. And I love the fact that you've unpicked things. And there were so many things in the book that I just read that I found myself nodding and going, oh yeah, some of it I knew, some of it I kind of hadn't made relevant to this subject. So thank you for writing it, because it's an absolute joy to read. And as ever, the way you communicate things is super engaging, super simple, and it's such a pleasure to talk to you. So I look forward to the next time we bump into each other in a physical location. But for now, Melina Palmer, thank you so much for all that you do for the behavioral science community and businesses everywhere. But above all, thank you for being an amazing guest on the show.
Oh, thank you for all the kind words. And I too look forward to our next in-person, way longer than we intended chat.
So that's it for this episode of the show. My enormous thanks to Melina for appearing, and to you for listening. To find out more about Melina, her Brainy Business podcast, and the book, The Truth About Pricing, How to Apply Behavioral Economics So Customers Buy, have a look in the show notes. There are links to all of those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. To discover episodes that you might have missed of the show, visit the show's website at humanriskpodcast.com. I'll be back very soon with another episode of this show, but in the meantime, remember, as Melina says, pricing It's not all about the price. And thank you so much for listening.